My jsme právě to jako prostě lidi jako říká fantastický příklad toho, se jako prostě nesmíme vlastně celé období 20-30 let, protože tam byl všude. No ještě. Takový ty asi znáš,
So this is your... Hello. Dobrý.
So good evening, everybody. I welcome you to the Václav Havel Library. Because it's probably the first time you are here, let me explain how it works a bit. First, the discussion will last around 1 hour and a half. And then you are invited to the second room, to a glass of wine plus some bread and cheese. And you can also buy there books published by Václav Havel Library and books of Václav Havel in English. Finally, I would like to invite you to the other English events that we are now preparing. It will be on 15th of May. David Vaughan will discuss with Paul Wilson, and on 11th of June with Petr Kolář. Now I give the floor to David, who is a broadcaster, journalist and university lecturer, and I wish you a very pleasant evening.
Thank you very much. Probably most of you already know Alexandr Vondra. He's been one of the most prominent Czech politicians and diplomats of the last quarter of a century. He's a former ambassador to the United States, former minister both of defense and foreign affairs and also of European affairs. He was an advisor to Václav Havel, and he was also a close friend of Václav Havel going back to the days of before the fall of communism, to the days of when they were both dissidents, albeit of different generations. Interestingly, I noticed when I was looking at your birthday, you're born in exactly the same month as Barack Obama.
Oh, exactly the same month?
The same month, in
He's
August 1961.
Is he a lion?
I'm wondering whether there are any astrologists among us as to whether there may be a political career may have been preordained.
What is
the
the
stars.
date?
He's the 4th of August 1961.
4th of August. So he should be a lion, like me.
He's a lion. I think he's a
But he
lion.
doesn't look like
a lion. A Leo. That would have been an interesting one for any journalists among you.
He's like a dog.
Yeah.
He's not like a lion.
He's very different. Yes, I was thinking very different. But maybe political ambition is one thing that you have.
But it's interesting. It should be a subject of some astrological study.
Is there an astrologist?
I know about 1961, but I did not know about the
It's
August.
exactly the same month. And another thing, when I was wondering how to start a discussion, I noticed that there was a WikiLeaks leak of a dispatch that was sent from the American embassy here to Washington, which said that you were the United States' closest ally on the Czech political scene, which I don't think was one of Mr. Assange's most devastating or surprising revelations, but is it one that you would agree with?
I don't know, it's always difficult to qualify myself, you know, it must be done by the others. But yes, I'm the friend of the United States. I has always been during my entire career because of two things. Primarily, I had a huge admiration for the concept of American freedom, of American republicanism, revolution. I love the United States, so for me, you know, to be there as the ambassador, that was one of the best times in my life. Just I could find a lot of inspiration. That's very good for somebody, you know, who has raised in this Czech atmosphere of the general shared skepticism. So if you come to the United States and see entirely different approach, you know, to almost everything. Then it's
when you say
like
so
an
the opposite
injection
of
of
skepticism,
energy, you know.
The opposite of skepticism. So I mean, also an element of naivety as well.
And it was not just about myself, you know. My 3 children were growing up there, coming to the 1st grade, so have seen absolutely different interrelationship, for example, with the teachers. So this is the country where education has been born, the modern education by Comenius, but if really somewhere the elementary school is rather the playground where the kids are learning how to compete and not are tortured by the teachers, it's the American school. Here in Europe there is our conviction that this is just a jungle where, you know, the people are shooting each other, but that's not simply true. You know, my children, they were not coming to any elite school, they were coming, you know, to the normal standard elementary school.
But in Washington, D.C.
And once they were coming back to Prague school, you know, it was a shock, you know, because the kids are experimenting. So, you know, painting, for example, the apples in a blue color or such things. And the reaction in the US was great. You know, explain me, you know, how did you develop this this idea, you know, to paint the
I'm from Britain, and
while
yeah,
coming back to the Czech environment, you know, the reaction to such experiment was, "I stupid." You know, it's nonsense. So it's constantly downgrade your self-confidence, and then the Czechs are not able to compete in the global world because they are afraid, you know, to show up something.
On the other hand, I mean, I come from the UK, and with my children growing up and going to Czech schools, I think, great, the Czech school system, they actually learn something.
Yeah, that's true. That's true that you will learn a lot, but then the problem is that it's not just about a knowledge, you know, but also about the ability to use the knowledge. And here is the deficiency. So that was one, you know, love to American way of life. Second, I love the country, you know, it's different. I love the Czech countryside. It's absolutely different from the US, but if you, for example, love nature, it's fantastic, you know, to discover the American West, to discover Alaska. That's something really exceptional. And the third, I am deeply convinced that Europeans, and the Czechs in particular, in this salami position between Germany and Russia, vitally needs the American presence in Europe and security cooperation. So there was also this political logic behind it. So 3 reasons.
It's also, it sounds quite romantic the way that you're painting the picture. I mean,
maybe I does not look like I don't look like a romantic, but I am a romantic.
And I mean, it's something that possibly maybe also goes back to the days of Tomáš Masaryk, the first Czech president whose wife was also from the United States.
Yes, and you can, you know, those of you who knows Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk and his philosophical concept, you could discover a lot of inspiration. It's not just about the wife. It's his seminal works, like on the suicide and others, are full of influences by American philosophy, by American concept of
his great hero was George Washington.
Revolution. The Protestant tradition of the American thinking, you could see a lot, and there is one Czech historian, I hope that he's still alive and wrote plenty of books, George Kovtun, who is the emigre from Czechoslovakia and was working in the Library of Congress when I was there. And he has written extensively on these American traces in Masaryk.
Isn't there a problem, I mean, that you can trace back to Masaryk as well, though, that the fact that one thing that the American system of democracy doesn't solve is the problem of nationalities, all living together on the same space, different nationalities. Because that's not an American problem. And it seems that it was also a problem that Masaryk, through the Czechoslovakia he was president of in between the wars, also was unable to solve, partly because there wasn't really a mold or a model to follow.
The American Republic is based primarily on the idea. It was created by the people who were escaping Europe, you know, facing the various types of oppression, the religious or economic poverty or whatever, and were escaped to the new world to establish something better. That's it's basically an ideological concept. Yeah, while most of modern European states, as we know them, you know, they are based either on this Westphalian concept, so it's related, you know, cuius regio, eius religio issue, or it's based on the tribe concept of the national community. That's the 19th century German unification and all that. So, United States, it's an entirely different concept than Czech Republic, Germany, France, or whatever.
You're a member of a political party, the Civic Democratic Party, that is relatively, well, considerably Eurosceptic, and so you don't think that the American model can in some way be imported to Europe?
Well, I don't want to make any parallels now, but yes, to a certain extent, the United States is not the only ideological project. It's European Union is also ideological project. Soviet Union, and don't want to make any kind of parallels here or parables, but it's also was also an ideological project. So yes, that's what the European Union and the United States have in common. And you know, we call themselves the realists, not the skeptics. And the realist means, you know, we can achieve what is possible now, but we should be careful in pushing something into a situation when the general European public is not ready for.
On the other hand, I mean, the
or
government
is not ready for yet.
The government that you were a member of under Mirek Topolánek, not only was it Eurosceptic, but Mr. Topolánek was often overtly hostile towards the European Union, even in the language he was using, with that topped up also by the language that President Klaus was using, talking about, you know, using words like shit, for example, in connection with the European Union,
no, Klaus,
which is not necessarily
I think, speaking about Klaus, it's more difficult, but you should differentiate. You know, there are the various Klaus in the course of time. You know, there was a Klaus as a prime minister, there was Václav Klaus as a prime minister who basically has sent and signed the application to the European Union. Yeah. There is a Klaus signature. And then is a current Klaus who even speculated recently. I noticed that the best way we should do is to leave the European Union, and you cannot here to find any kind of a statement by the ODS politician. He's not a member of the ODS since he has left.
Honorary.
No more.
He's left. He no longer.
He's left. Right. 2008, right. He came to Congress, put the legitimacy or metaphorically on the table as I'm leaving.
Well, nonetheless, the question I'm asking you more is not a question sort of what the shifts in President Klaus's views, but more the idea that how can you constructively move the European onwards when you're at the same time cultivating within the society an idea that the European Union is something hostile or unsympathetic, let's say, to our interests, or it's limiting our sovereignty.
Those who were leaving Europe, you know, to build something better in the United States. It took 200 years, you know, to get into a consolidated democratic state. There were the wars. There was a civil war in between. There were other fights. You know, Joachim is here, you know, his knowledge about the Native American people and their encounters with the idealist coming in Europe, from Europe to build a new country, and you know, some would call this even a genocide or whatever. So it was not easy. It was not easy. And the argument here is that the European Union is a very diversified area, full of very diversified societies, which to a certain extent are lacking even this raison d'être, which was born by the American settlers. They were Protestant mostly. They were mostly English-speaking people.
I mean, the Second World War was a pretty strong raison d'être, really, wasn't it?
What do you mean?
The Second World War, the legacy of the Second World War was quite a strong raison d'être.
Yeah, but nobody wants to repeat it. And it does not look... yes, there's a strong incentive to work together, to cooperate. And, for example, you know, what were the causes of the two major wars in Europe? First was protectionism, that has played a very important role as a cause to the First World War. And Second World War, what has preceded? The revisionism of the German policy, and then the attempt to dominate the continent. So yes, we have to do everything not to repeat the same mistakes. On one hand, to build, you know, the fortresses within Europe. So, from this perspective, the project and the reality, in fact, of the common market, all those 4 freedoms, you know, that's a fantastic achievement, and we should defend it. We should even make it deeper, because there are still a lot of deficiencies. And in this area, even with ODS, we were fully on the board, always. And second is the attempt to prevent the attempt to dominate by somebody in Europe. Which usually, if somebody wants to dominate, then the contra-reaction comes.
And what do you mean by that, concretely? Who's dominating?
Well, the history of Europe is full of the attempts of domination. So Joseph Stalin was trying to dominate, Adolf Hitler was trying to dominate, Napoleon was trying to dominate. So
if you compare,
usually they ended in a major war.
If you compare, for example, the 2 previous governments in which, in fact 3 previous governments in which you served, and if you compare the impression, let's say, that they made within the European context, if you compare it with someone like Radek Sikorski today in Poland, it seems poles apart. He's also fairly Eurosceptical. He's also, like you, an Atlanticist, a Euro-Atlanticist, but he has also, for example, done a great deal to mend fences, for example, with Germany, and to actually encourage Germany to play a more active role in Europe, which was a very, quite an unusual and quite a brave thing for a Polish statesman to do. And he did his best, he's done his best as well to cultivate good relations with Russia, which the previous Polish government was far less successful.
Now look, I know Radek Sikorski very well. We are the friends. We even have spent sometimes with our families on the vacations. So I am one of those who are able to sustain his arrogant attitude. I have a lot of admiration, you know, He's one of a few real personalities in the current European politics. His emigration from Poland, and he served as a war correspondent for the British newspapers in Afghanistan.
He was also in the Bullingdon Club in Oxford, which is a famous old Etonian drinking club, which I was rather strange.
And he's not an alcoholic, contrary to many those who wants to show us big, but they are not as big. So yes, he had an era of strong Euroscepticism when he was working in the United States. It was the time when I was there as the ambassador. At a certain moment, which correlates, I would say, with the appearance of Barack Obama as not as a lion but as a dog of the world politics, he maybe has reached the conclusion that we should not anymore rely on the United States, and has made a decision to play the role in the European politics. So he has made a meaningful and, I would say, dramatic shift in his rhetorics. You know, Radek is not an idealist. He's a realpolitik par excellence, and as I know him, and that's not a criticism, you know, but he accommodates his views and opinions and rhetorics according to what served best to him and to Poland. And that's a legitimate conclusion. Poland, you know, having the doubts about the US commitment on one hand, and knowing that is a power measured by European standards. So it's one of the 6 key European players behind, you know, alongside this UK, France, Germany, Spain.
So you disagree with him that the United States is no longer play, let's say, the key role in European security?
You know, I see the same tendencies like Radek sees. I, as a Czech representative, and Czechs, you know, cannot have the same aspiration like Poles, because, you know, they have 40 million, we are just 10 million, so...
It's not, I mean, the Czech Republic isn't one of the smallest countries in Europe,
so
it's about somewhere in the middle.
I may be slower in I still want to argue till the last moment that it makes the sense to work together. Yeah? If we lose, then we lose, and we'll have to make our minds otherwise. That's, but maybe, you know, for him it's easier to make this kind of a shift, because to be a Pole, it means that you play the power play. The Czech cannot have this aspiration because of many reasons. You know, you can have this aspiration on the individual basis, but not as a Czech representative, because you will not find a support in the nation. Certainly, the Poles. One of the differences between the Czechs and Poles is that the ability of Poles to keep together. I could observe this, you know, even outside of Europe, in the United States, when we were lobbying for NATO enlargement. For Poles it was easy because they stay together. Trade unions, various Polish-American organizations. The Czechs are very individualistic. It was extremely difficult.
That should appeal to you as a
to create
an admirer of American
an impression that the Czechs are an influential entity, as a collective. You know, our contribution to the success of the NATO enlargement was that we have the individuals like Havel. That was our goal. You know, we should mention him more here, but we brought Havel. They brought the Polish community, and it's, do you feel, you know, they did not bring Valenza. They brought the Polish strengths, Polish importance. the location of Poland, you know, this is the territory where the wars were going there and there. Here the Czechs, they gave up usually, so that's what it's a historical injustice. You know, we have this beautiful Prague which was not bombed because we gave up, while the Poles, they were defending themselves, and Warsaw was totally destroyed. So we are now selling this to American and other tourists for a hard currency because of our soft approach at the time of the crisis, while the Polish, they had the hard approach and they cannot gain the hard currency. No, that's injustice.
You mentioned...
and to Radek, we will see, you know, last sentence. Sometimes after the European elections, they will, or we all decide that our influence would not be the major one, about the representative. Who's going to be the president of Commission, president of European Council, and the European so-called foreign minister. He would be ideal one, but I would like to see whether a guy with such a degree of self-confidence, straightforward, I would like him to be a foreign minister, but I'm very interested whether the Germans, the French, would allow him to get the job.
You think you'd upset the apple cart a little bit too much?
Well, you know, there is a first test was the NATO Secretary
like to
General, and Madame Merkel did the best to have a Norwegian, not to have a Polish.
But I'd like to ask you, you've hinted, well, when you're talking about President Obama, you've hinted that you consider him to be too dovish, not enough of a lion. I'd like to ask you about your time when you were Czech Ambassador in Washington, which was at the time of the Clinton administration.
Yeah.
And what were your impressions of Clinton? Because you must have come to meet him on several occasions. He was president when the Czech Republic joined NATO. It was also the very same time when he led the controversial, and in this country, highly controversial, bombing of Yugoslavia. What were your impressions of him as ambassador there when you were ambassador?
To put this simply, very good impression. He was a great president. Maybe, you know, he was not a major thinker, but he was a man who first listened to the others, and second was open-minded in his concept, so he was able to respond to what he has heard. And last but not least, that's important in the politics, he had a charisma. Extraordinary charisma. I have never seen something after that. So you could disagree with him on some issues, and I'm not a Democrat, so you know I would find the ways, you know, the areas where I would disagree with him. But if he talked to you, it was like an aura. So. Quite oftenly, I have seen that the people who were opposing him were suddenly almost defenseless because of the energy of this special charisma. And he has an achievement, in particular with Europe, this idea of NATO enlargement. I think he should be credited because he made a decision against the bureaucracy which was subordinated to him. He made a decision, you know, just in response to the tragic events in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And secondly, he was able to work this together with the Republicans, and thus to has achieved a kind of a consensus within the American, I don't know, society.
At that time, Václav Havel was a very significant figure representing this country
Absolutely.
in the eyes of Americans.
Absolutely, the most important, and we should thank him forever for his role, because again, he has something similar with Clinton, this ability to listen and to react to the situation. So he was personally convinced how much it is important to do this thing. I mean,
and at that time, Mr. Klaus, who was chairman of the House of Deputies, he was opposed, for example, to the bombing of Yugoslavia and to the intervention in Kosovo.
Klaus internally, I would say, you know, inside his soul, was even against the NATO enlargement. He has never said this. We had some private conversation on this, and he was not supportive, but as a realist, he understood that this is important for the country, and never openly speak against this.
Why then? Why was he opposed?
I think intellectually he's something like a libertarian. You know what is the US libertarian? It's a way of thinking, Cato Institute, and it's a strict economic liberal which does not believe in the role of state, and the security issues are almost irrelevant. It's a free trade.
And I mean, when it comes to
if, for example, the libertarians would would win the Republican primaries. You know, I do not like Obama. I think he is a catastrophe for Europe. I think that I do not see any leadership. I do not see any knowledge about European history. His niveau is from entirely different corners of the world. Clinton has understood. But, for example, to imagine that the President of the United States will be Ron Paul or his son Randy Paul as a representative of this libertarian thinking, that would be even worse for us than Barack Obama.
I'd like to
because it would be leading, he would lead the United States to the total isolationism, ignoring the world role at all. And this is something for small, you know, countries like us, it's not good.
I mean, very famously, just before becoming president, in fact 2 weeks before becoming president, Václav Havel called for the dissolution of all the different blocs, the European, both the Warsaw Pact, which of course happened, and also NATO. Do you remember at that time talking with Havel about it, and whether you argued with him, or at that time did you disagree with him?
I think it's a mythos that he would take a policy of the equidistance towards the Warsaw Pact and NATO. That's.
He did say it was on the 16th of December, '89, just before the time.
Yes, look, we have said so many things, but I think once he became the president, he was feeling more and more responsibility. That's a second, you have to understand that there was also certain tactics, because the primary goal of Czechoslovak at that time, government and diplomacy, was to get rid of the Russian troops outside of the territory here, to become the really independent state. And certainly, you know, to provoke with, you know, NATO membership, it would not be the best recipe how to achieve this primary goal. So, for example, the Poles, who are considered, you know, very pro-NATO, very hawkish in that, they had a foreign minister, Skubiszewski, in the early 90s, and he was even more careful than Havel, because Poland was in a delicate situation, that the Russian troops coming back from Eastern Germany, you know, were using the Polish territory, and they did not want to simply to provoke. But Havel was a first statement from Central and Eastern Europe who showed up in the headquarters of the North Atlantic Alliance. It was in March 1991, and openly declared, that NATO should open the door for the others. So well before the Poles or some others, maybe Hungarians were the first because they had in relatively most comfortable situation.
And Havel was consistently the most sort of interventionist politician during the Yugoslav wars as well, wasn't he, on the Czech political scene? Certainly if you compare him with the foreign ministers, first of all.
Well, there were some different views, for example, between Havel and Dinsbier on NATO. There was a Dinsbier who had this idea to have some new structure, this pan-European, he called this a European Security Council, modeled according to the United Nations Security Council, with a headquarters in Prague. That was Jiří Dinsbier's plan. There were also different views on how to deal with the fall of Yugoslavia. Jiří Dinsbier was defending Yugoslavia and was a more, let's say, pro-Serbian. Havel, on the other hand, was speaking, in favor of some actions.
And then, Mr. Josef Zelenec, who was then Havel, subsequent foreign minister.
Wait a minute, Havel did not so much provoke, for example, the countries like Slovenia and Croatia to go a separate way. But once this happened, and once the war has broken out, Havel was the one who strongly advocated the West should do something to stop the war and to protect the people and their freedom. That's certainly true, and here he has a different political concept, different opinions from, for example, Dinsbier or Klaus, who were on the same board.
And at the time of the first Klaus government, when you were one of the deputy foreign ministers, were you kind of playing a role of mediator between these different forces? I'd be quite interested to know how it was working.
I think Zelenec, who was a foreign minister, was serving as a first deputy, so he was much more realistic in that. So we had our troops, we sent the troops, for example, to the various Balkans operations since the beginning. Zelenec was a bit different from Klaus and even Dinsbier on this particular issue. And if you ask me, yes, look, I has played a role of, we had President Václav Havel, we had Prime Minister Václav Klaus, on some issues they were like, day and night or sun and moon. And we were responsible for the foreign policy of the country, which, if you have a big power, you can have different views within the country. Which model is closer to you? But if you are a medium-sized country or a smaller country, you have to follow one road. So there was a need somehow.
But at that time,
to reconcile.
At that time, Klaus was very much representing the kind of the party political model, wasn't he? And Havel was was the more, let's say, individualist or individual responsibility model. That was the cliche
I think,
of the two politicians. Was it not like
I don't agree that this was a major disagreement. Havel has perfectly understood that it's not the normal standard democracy is not viable without the political parties. That's anarchy. Can you show me one democracy without the political parties? No. So and Havel was not as stupid. He was a smart man. So he perfectly understood the role of the political parties. So he disliked Klaus, that's for sure. But at the same time, he understood that the parties must play the role and Klaus' role was that he was the builder of one of the two major political parties. So, you know, both had to be somehow realist despite all the disagreements. But the real disagreements were then about the real things, you know. For example, Yugoslavia, for example, you know, something in the economy. So those fights were about prestige, of course. The politics is it's not omittable thing,
Yes.
but prestige and influence. But they had disagreements on a very particular issues. So maybe you know what you have mentioned. Yes, Havel had a strong opinion that in democracy the civic initiative, the role of the NGOs is crucial. Klaus has opposed.
Where do you stand?
I think we need a civil society. And in fact, look, Klaus' personal history that he is building many organizations of the civil society or the NGOs.
So he's playing a game, he's saying he disapproves.
No, but look, where I am, of course that we need a civil society. Without a civil society, without the NGOs, the political parties cannot exist. That's like
the navel, I suppose the umbilical cord.
Yeah,
umbilical cord.
You understand.
But he obviously, I mean, Klaus clearly underestimated
I
the importance of
agree
building a
with
civil
Havel
society.
that you need a civil society, you need the NGOs, and you should communicate with them. And that's what I did my entire life. And I am with the NGOs if I'm not in the government.
I've noticed you've commented on
and
something.
even in the government,
Yeah.
when I was in the government, I was talking with them. You can ask, you know, whoever people in NATO, who, you know, we were working together. But also I agree with Klaus that, on the other hand, I agree with Klaus that you need a political parties, otherwise it's an anarchy and, you know, the political parties in fact are the highest, they are the supreme NGOs, you know, where the interests, everything is about the advocacy of some interest, some particular interest.
What do you make of somebody like Mr. Babiš, who is now the finance minister, who is not a party man, and he's so simultaneously a magnate, a multimillionaire? Do you think that's dangerous?
I think it's very dangerous. I think that we are the most dangerous moment in the last 25 years, because you know, it's not a political party. It's a private project of one man who has billions of money and owns the mainstream media.
Why is it happening? It's a trend everywhere in Europe. I mean, you only have to look in countries like Italy, for example.
The trend is that there is a certain mistrust towards this traditional political parties. You could see this in Italy, you could see this in Netherlands, in France or elsewhere, but never you could see a role of like a Babiš. Berlusconi was not the same type.
Why? In what way?
For example, the media. He had two entertainment channels, while Babiš has the ownership of the mainstream media, those who are leading in opinion making. So they have a direct impact on the political scene. That was not the story of Silvio Berlusconi. He had something like, you know, TV Nova minus because...
I mean, do you think that the Prime Minister, Mr. Sobotka, is strong enough to be accountable?
I'm afraid that is a very weak, you know, that is weak, and we can see this every day, that he's not able to counter him, and it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous because, you know, I had a lot of disagreement with Mirek Kalousek, but he was absolutely right in making this kind of a parallel that Babiš is something like a tiger in the meat factory, in the meat shop.
And you've remained remarkably...
To allow him, you know, to go into the meat shop and believe that he's not going to buy. You know.
You've remained remarkably loyal to your party because, I mean, you have. I mean, you've seen your own party more or less disintegrate around.
I'm loyal to my wife, I'm loyal to my party, I'm loyal to my country. I think loyalty.
On at least one of those points, I think you're not.
Loyalty is, you know, those who are loyal. Those are endangered species, and we should protect them.
You mentioned. I mean, I think we have to come back to Obama because the moment that Barack Obama became President of the United States, you were one of the co-signatories of a letter that was signed by yourself, by Havel, by Karel Schwarzenberg, by Lech Wałęsa, by Lech Kaczynski, and also former Latvian President Freiberger, a whole number of very well-known European politicians, Central European politicians, appealing to Obama to focus more on Europe. Are you not being, and you've also been very critical now of his policies, but are you not being also unfair? Because I mean, he inherited a very difficult situation from the previous administration, where Europe had lost a lot of confidence in America after the Iraq War, where people became suspicious after what happened. Also, the fact that Obama has been very dovish in terms of his foreign policy and hasn't taken the same sort of hawkish line that, for example, Bush took, it's actually enabled him to, for example, in the current crisis with Russia and Ukraine, to sustain a consensus in the West, which is actually quite remarkable, I think. Isn't that partly thanks to the non-combative approach of the Obama administration?
No, look, we should differentiate two things. First of all, it's let's say a certain realistic correction of idealistic overstretch, or how would say it. Yes, Obama has inherited the United States in a situation of a certain imperial overstretch.
Yeah. It's a nice euphemism.
No, it's not a euphemism. It's a scientific term, imperial overstretch.
Can you explain it? Because I don't know what it means.
If you are a powerful country with strength, influence, you are driven by your own interest as well as the wishes of the others to assume responsibility. That's a standard thing. So if there is a superpower number one, then you are encircled by the second tier, you know, China, Russia. Number one is in tension with number two tier, logically. But then there is a tier number three, so those who are felt threatened, for example, by Russia, by China, by whatever. If somebody wants to dominate Europe, it could be by Germany or France. History is full of that. Then the third tier is appealing to number one to help them. Yeah, that's a classic.
Your enemy is my friend.
Of course. Yeah, you could mention this. So, for example, the United States were under the big pressure to act. For example, in the early 90s, to act in Yugoslavia. They did not want to act originally. Jim Baker, a foreign minister in 1991, when the war started, has said, look, we don't have this dog in that fight. There was a famous sentence, we don't have a dog in that fight. European Union had a foreign minister, you know, chairman of the council, was foreign minister Jacques Pos. You know which country?
Luxembourg?
Yes, exactly, the great
Yes.
very influential. So he made the announcement, the hour of Europe comes. And then, you know, the British started, the Germans went like a free rider recognizing Croatia and Slovenia, then the French and English were fighting, you know, whether to use Western European Union or NATO as the vehicle of certain action, and ended this in a disaster that United Nations took the responsibility and were not able to do anything.
So you're saying the mistakes that
finally, in 1995, the US started to use their hard power to contain the war. The same was with the example of the first Iraqi war, you know, the liberation of Kuwait. Kuwait was occupied by Saddam Hussein, and
so you're saying that with the second Iraq war, the United States had kind of learned the wrong lesson from the Yugoslav conflict. They thought, we have to act.
I think they did right, Americans, both acting in the first Iraqi war as well as in the Yugoslav war. I think they were right. But again, you know, for example, Kosovo, the Americans did not want to fight. Once Clinton finally made a decision in 1999, it was very difficult for him. He had to show up in the television to show to the fellow Americans where Kosovo is. Because normal American even did not know where it is. So he had to convince the public, and he did it not because of the interest. He did it because he was convinced by the others to do it. Plus the role of Madeleine Albright, who, you know, everybody's decision making is somehow shaped by your environment, history, family. Her lesson of the history was the Munich experience, that if there is a evil or aggression or whatever, we should stop the aggressor and not to leave this just behind. So Havel, Albright and others, they were convincing Clinton to act. This is a story of Kosovo war. It's not that, you know, United States decision makers would be dreaming, you know, what we can go to exploit in Kosovo, some copper mines, coal or whatever. Not at all. From the perspective of the realpolitik, Kosovo, Bismarck once described.
What about the second Iraq war then?
Second Iraqi war, that was a reaction to 9/11. To 9/11, and to a certain extent also a reaction to the decision by half of the first George Bush administration that during the liberation of Kuwait they did not remove Saddam Hussein, and then had to pay, you know, the price for this decision not to go to Baghdad.
Because I mean,
of course,
Obama hugely weakened Obama's position.
And some general interest in the Middle East, certainly. You know, they have the obligation to protect Israel. So back to Obama, I do have an understanding for his realistic corrections, because the United States were in the situation of certain overstretch because of the long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, a lack of European support, rising anti-American feeling in the world. So the United States had to make a realistic correction. That's no doubts about this. But I am convinced that he made a bad decision. So he should, the decision whether to leave Afghanistan or Iraq, I think he should leave Afghanistan, not Iraq. Because Iraq is a more important country with the real impact on the situation in the Middle East. And this is a country with some hope for recovery, while Afghanistan is a hopeless. So he made a bad decision in this. And he made also the bad decision in Europe, for example, with this ballistic missile defense concept. You know, of course that we wanted this because of the Russians. We did not say that, of course.
It was pretended that it was because of
but we wanted to anchor this part of Europe in Western world, also by the military installation. That was
some people are saying that now we should go back to that. It's too late now, isn't it?
Time to move. You know, I think I have told this publicly in the last couple of weeks many times that what the Americans should do immediately to deploy at least those installations according to Obama concept. So Czech Republic does not have any role here, but to Poland and to Romania immediately. Immediately.
I think we should come to that in a minute. There's one question I'd like to ask you in between, which is that for 2 years you were Defense Minister of the Czech Republic.
Yes.
I remember that the statement you gave when you first became Minister in 2010 was, you said, I want an army which has less fat, more muscle. To what extent did you actually succeed in at least beginning that process?
I think we have succeeded in a way that, you know, if you would see the numbers of, you know, maybe I did not succeed personally, but
I was too diplomatic to.
But it's, you know, it's a very difficult. It's not about the food in the reception. It's just about that you don't have a time to sleep. It's a chemistry, you know, to survive. You know, you need a sleep to accommodate the life when you are sleeping 4 hours, no more than. But back to the ministry, to the armed forces. Yes, with a much lower budget, we were able to honor all our real commitments. So, you know, budget cutting down, the number of the troops in Afghanistan has grown up even, you know, in 2010, 11. Now, of course, it's being decreased because everybody is decreasing. We are leaving, you know, in general.
And the ministry was in a total mess when you inherited it. I mean, I think that, I don't know whether even you would acknowledge that, but certainly, I mean, I remember speaking to one diplomat from a NATO country who said that of all the post-communist, that's a rather outdated word, of all the new members of the European Union, new members of NATO that he works with, the Czech Defence Ministry was one of the most opaque.
What is it?
Hard to understand and hard to see what they were saying, what was going on. This was just about the time when you became minister.
I would differentiate between the armed forces on one hand and the ministry.
You were the head of the ministry, so...
We reduced the number of the bureaucrats, we have reduced the number of the departments, so we have rationalized the ministry itself, and it's in fact a never-ending story, so you could continue in that. But on the other hand, the Czech soldiers, I have nothing wrong to say about them. They are fantastic. Those are a totally different soldiers what, to be compared with those, you know, what we have remembered 20 years ago.
And what sort of Czech army can be useful to NATO today? What sort of army would be?
We were in all major operations and did not.
But I'm talking about reform and change and where it should be going, where it should be heading, the Czech army.
Well, now
Czech armed service.
We need to do the same realistic correction as I has recommended, but a smart one, you know, not a stupid one. So yes, of course, we should concentrate more on the core mission of NATO, and that's the defense of the member states. You know, Article 5. You know, these musketeers.
And what does that mean concretely in terms of armaments, for example, in terms of the types of units that will be deployed?
We are facing new Russian expansionism, no doubts about this. So we should concentrate on the defense of the territory, because you know this Ukrainian destabilization could be spread or spill over into the Baltic states, for example. Latvia has a large Russian minority, and we have a commitment to defend Latvia. We don't have a legal commitment to defend Ukraine. But we do have a commitment to defend Romania, we do have a commitment to defend Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania, and we do have a commitment to defend Poland. And those are the countries which are close to this zone of instability. So should do more for their defense than fixing the situation like in Afghanistan. That's pretty clear. And thus, for example, what does it mean for armed forces? A bit of change strategy in the armament. So, for example, what I've decided, you know, to modernize the machine guns instead of, you know, some equipment which you could use only in desert environment. Should have more exercises here in Europe instead of sending them far away. But you know, we were sending them far away because it was US request, and everything is some kind of a trade-off. So we wanted United States to continue with their security guarantees for Europe, and you have the equipment which we do not have. So, for example, nuclear deterrence. So that's another importance of the United States. We cannot aspire for this, it's a nonsense. On the other hand, you know, if we are expecting something from Americans, the Americans are expecting something from us. So they were expecting us to be in Iraq, to be in Afghanistan, to be in the Balkans, of course. And here we have done everything what we were asked.
And in terms of protecting the Baltic states, are you actually suggesting that at this stage that NATO should be deploying troops on the eastern borders of NATO?
Yes, I think we should seriously think, for example, about a stable air defense protection, because right now they don't have any supersonic aircrafts. So it's their protection is done by some rotation. So for a period of 4 to 6 months, it's done by one NATO member. So we were doing this twice, for example. But don't make any illusion, you know, 2, 3, 4 Czech Gripens, it's not enough. So yes, I think the West must react to what's happened with the Ukraine.
You wrote, in a recent article that you wrote, you stated that the West or NATO should start measuring Russia by the same yardstick that Russia is measuring other countries. It strikes me that that argument strikes as being slightly flawed, because
why?
Because it implies that we should pull ourselves down to the level at which Putin is currently, I suppose, defying international.
I am not
suggesting kind of tit for tat approach.
No, I am not recommending the eye for eye. That's certainly not the case. However, I'm warning, you know, to get rid of certain illusions, you know, here. I noticed, for example, how Angela Merkel or Barack Obama saying, you know, after the Russian grab of Crimea, that, look, Putin is a man of the 19th century. Surprisingly, you did not know that? And then, if you know something about the history, you know, it's very interesting. For example, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, sitting with Joseph Stalin in Yalta, Crimea, 1945, together with Churchill. Churchill was warning. FDR was a bit naive and had a KGB agent in his staff, you know, Algraves. Then suddenly, once you know, he was already very ill on the wheelchair, has said to Averell Harriman, who was his ambassador in Moscow, look, Averell, I did not expect Stalin. He's a guy of the 19th century. Absolutely the same sentence. So, you know, just...
I mean, Stalin wasn't a politician of the 19th century, he was a totalitarian politician.
If in the middle of night, you are coming back home, and suddenly, you know, out of the jungle, a killer cross your road with an axe, what they are going to do? You have to defend yourself, not to write a poem about the killer of the 22nd century.
You're using historical examples. I mean, there's also, as a historian, I'd be quite cautious about using historical examples too literally. For example, there is a danger, isn't there, of saying Putin's Russia equals the Soviet Union, which obviously is a mindset that's very strong in the Czech Republic for obvious reasons, obvious historical reasons, but it isn't necessarily accurate.
Here I'm a realist, you know. It does not mean that I want to bring us all back to the 19th century. Certainly not. But those things which happens now, I think, should lead us to a certain bit of realism. First of all, we should take the duties which we are willing to bear, and then must do everything to protect them. You know, the problem is we have nice speeches, a lot of visions. You know, what's happened in Ukraine, many people, not just myself, you know, everybody makes the various historical parallels. You know, somebody compared this to 1968 experience, somebody compared, I think, more rightly to 1938, but there is also a lesson of 1956.
What's the lesson of 1956?
Well, there was a minister, state secretary to President Eisenhower, John Foster Dulles. You know, if you come to Washington, D.C., you are landing on the Dulles International Airport, so it's named according to him. So he has exposed the policy, you know, he criticized the policy of containment and was recommending the policy of the rollback. You know, the Americans did a lot of great things, for example, establishing Radio Free Europe and other. And then was somehow, you know, provoking a little bit, or the Hungary uprising is a consequence of this. So, yes, Radio Free Europe was challenging, you know. Czechs did not listen that time, you know, as always. But the Hungarians were listening. They uprised against the communism, but nobody has.
There'll be an exaggeration to say
nobody has helped them. Nobody has helped them. Nobody has helped them. Yeah. So it is also a bit of lessons, you know, to put the realistic goals in front of us, but then, if we have the commitment, we must stay behind, because otherwise we are losing any credibility.
What does that mean concretely? Because, I mean, President Zeman on Sunday, he said that if Russia goes any further into Ukraine, into eastern Ukraine, that NATO should offer direct support, military support to Ukraine. Would you agree with him on that? And I mean, do you think this? I mean, it strikes me as being, whether you agree or not, it's not going to happen, is it?
It's a nice statement. I love the statement, but what
it's a statement that only the head of a small country, I think, can get away with.
What I told you before, we should not measure this by statement, by the will to act. And if there is a not will to act, and it's, I think it's not up on the Miloš Zeman, then we should be careful. It's simple as this. Maybe, you know, it's tough situation. It's tough situation.
What should we do?
What should you do?
What should we do?
A minimal program is to defend the NATO members.
And if
That's a minimum.
If there's a further destabilization in
we should do more, but we have to agree on that. Because otherwise it's just štěkání, jak se řekne štěkat?
Barking.
Barking without biting.
And what happens as
barking
well?
without biting. That's
and then we've got in May we've got an election coming up in Ukraine. What happens if, as in Egypt, the wrong, in quotes, candidate wins?
I don't know. I have spent a lot of time with the Ukrainians in 2004. I have visited Ukraine, Kiev, but also other destination, maybe 10 times in a year. I was helping Yushchenko and the company. That was when they were getting ready for the elections. Then the elections were stolen, so it caused the Orange Revolution. Again, I was coming there, helping them. They have got some chance, you know. I don't want to criticize them because it's difficult. You cannot expect a miracle to happen in the course of 3-4 years. And Putin, a lot has changed in 2008. A lot has changed in 2008, you know. Until 2008, the West was somehow on the offensive, setting up the agenda, and the Russians were mostly reacting. But since 2008, you know, the economic crisis came, which has led both Americans and Europeans to be really inward-looking. There was this fight for Lisbon Treaty after the Irish referendum. So the Europeans have spent everything, you know, just to protect the Eurozone, debt crisis, to win Lisbon, to have President Van Rompuy and Madame Ashton as a foreign minister. And we are starting to lose the East, part of that. The Ukrainians and the Georgians were coming to Bucharest NATO summit in the spring 2008, getting ready, you know, to enter into the so-called membership action plan. But Americans, you know, Bush has won the missile defense, but was not strong enough to win this. The Germans, the French did not want to offer the guarantees to those two countries. And then Putin has translated this, that he has a green light. So that's how the war in Georgia started. It was easy for him, you know, small country. So he grabbed it for 1/4 of territory. He started to press the Ukrainian government, so raising the prices of oil, and mostly the gas, because
that's what it was. But what should we do now? That's more the question. I mean, that's the mistakes that were made in the past.
I don't have any miraculous prescription here. I spent last month 3 days in Brussels talking at the German Marshall Fund, Brussels Forum, with a lot of decisions. I'm now a private person, so, but I talked with Rasmussen, with a lot of Americans, Germans. There was an Italian foreign minister, for example, a nice, beautiful woman. And on the question, which, you know, you asked me, she was asked the same question, and her response was, "Oh gosh, well, we cannot go to war. Or do you want us to?" So that's where we are. That's where we are now. So what, you know, poor Sasha Vondra now may recommend. I don't have an armada behind myself.
Do you think the Czechs now have a little bit more understanding for the position that Neville Chamberlain was in 1938?
No.
Because it's If nothing happens in Ukraine, if Russia annexes Eastern Ukraine,
and
nothing happens,
there was a commitment.
Isn't there a...
There was a commitment.
Yeah.
There was a commitment. Yeah. Chamberlain, you know, if I would,
France had a commitment.
if I say here we are not going to defend the Baltics, then you can tell me that I'm Chamberlain. No, I'm not. Look, I would love to say the same sentence like Miloš Zeman, but I want to play a fair game with you in advance. Here, Putin is not listening. Look, I am here talking seriously.
Yeah.
If I'm asked in the media, I would. But again, we must play this fairly, and I fairly have to say that I did not see any. It's difficult because they do not have any armed forces. They have maybe 6,000 troops just to be deployed. The Ukrainians, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's a lesson that, you know, if you are. We were living in a world where we believe that everybody can make his choice. Yeah. That's a nice word. I like it. But of course it can go into conflict with the others. That's what's happened there. And yeah, we should fight, yes. I will go, but you know, I'm afraid that I'm alone.
I wonder.
And Zeman will not go there.
Interesting.
It's no, look. It's,
no, but it's serious. It's serious.
Serious. Don't.
I mean, this is why I'm making the point with.
I have many
it's,
friends.
It was exactly the problem with Neville
I have many friends.
British people fight.
I was not coming to Maidan this time. I was there 10 years ago. I was there, you know, 10 times in a year. This time I did not go there because, frankly, NATO was excluded in 2008, realistically. Then the conclusion was, let's start to fix Ukraine with a European soft power. Yeah. Not provoke Russians so much, so use not the American hard power, but the European soft power. And it resulted in the fall of 2013, the last fall, that the Europeans came to Kiev, basically inviting the Ukrainians for the lunch, association agreement. No. But you know, it was like to invite for the lunch and not being able to pay. That's an exact metaphor. So Putin came from the other side and has offered to pay. And frankly, it's not a trivial situation. So Yanukovych at that time was not a Russian agent. He was a, you know, just a ordinary corrupted Ukrainian politician who was trying somehow to save the country. And the Europeans, you know, we made the mistakes. A lot of mistakes just in the last 6-7 months. You know, you cannot invite somebody for a lunch without willing to pay for. That's a basic rule. If I'm inviting you for a lunch, and I will not pay, then we can have a conflict.
It seems very frightening.
Second, you know, once it has turned this wrong direction because of our inability to pay for the lunch, there was a conflict in Maidan, and the 3 ministers were coming there, including Radek. They have reached some compromise signed by opposition, Yanukovych and the 3 ministers. They have reached this maybe due to Radek aggressivity, you know, I don't know whether you saw in the internet.
He said either sign it or die, didn't he?
Yes, because he knew what this is about. So it brought Klitschko, Yatsenyuk, and this the third one to either side. But then what's happened? You know, they have brought this to Maidan, just the three people from the opposition, and Maidan has sent them away. You know, there was some 26-year-old boy, you know, and said, fuck you with that. Yeah. If you are engaging yourself in a such delicate situation, and there was an attempt, you know, to buy the time, you must be ready to stay behind it and to do everything to win it. So, if my minister, like Steinmeier, was there, Steinmeier, the French, the Poland. So then the president should go immediately to Maidan and say, look guys, it's a victory, we have achieved a compromise, it's a victory for all of us, otherwise you will be dead. But that did not happen. So
we've been talking for nearly an hour and a half.
One mistake after another.
So there were a couple of other things I wanted to ask you. One thing that I did want to ask you before I shut up is the circumstances under which you left the government, because it was in the midst of a corruption scandal, which corruption scandal.
It's not a corruption.
Let's say, okay, well, it was in the midst of a question about. I
strongly say it's not a.
Okay, but just let me finish. Okay, it was in the midst of questions about what happened to 500 million crowns, which went to companies providing conference facilities while you during the Czech EU presidency. Your signature obviously was not on any of the documents, so you're not among the people who've been accused by the police, although the tax authorities today have, as you know, imposed a fine on the Czech government office of 380 million crowns as a result of what happened. So okay, it's not a corruption scandal. Something went wrong. Something went wrong. On your watch, as Bush would have said.
Yeah, it could easily happen that something could go wrong, but it doesn't mean that this is a corruption scandal. I do not know anything about the corruption there, and nobody.
What is it? Was
it a cliche?
Was it incompetence by the people who have been?
That's
or a mistake, to put it more diplomatically.
Incompetence, mistake, maybe it's very different from the corruption. So you know that's.
We're talking about huge sums, though. I mean, well, relatively huge sums. It's not a huge sum, obviously, but in the grand scheme of things,
look,
but in terms of conference facilities, it's quite a lot of money.
I don't know. What is strange? It's the amount of this about 100 million. 20, which were discovered on some banking accounts. Right. I also know that about the same amount was a subject of the dispute, which was not paid to the company and their sub-clients when I was there. It was paid at the end of 2009, and I have left early May 2009. So it was paid half year after. But again, you know, the amount of 500 was paid total, including this uncertain or strange amount of 100 something. It has lasted 6 months. It was not just about the price of interpreting machine. It was much larger portfolio of the activities which were covered by this. I remember 10 years ago, 12 years ago, there was a summit NATO, so it lasted 4 days, not 6 months. 4 very intensive days, of course. And the cost of the same work which has been done during the EU presidency in 2002 was about 120 million or so. I know that this 120 million costs during the NATO summit was absolutely comparable amount to what has been spent in Madrid, Riga, Washington and other NATO summits for the same technical equipments. You know, it's including satellites or whatever. You know, it's not just Czech English interpretation as somebody. So I don't know. But I know one thing for sure, that those people who were working for the presidency were motivated just by noble intentions to do it professionally.
So the 12 people who've been charged have been
wrongly
12.
Out of 12 are 3 clerks, and the rest are the entrepreneurs. And
the tax authorities have also made a mistake.
What those entrepreneurs were doing on the line, you know, provider, sub-provider, sub-sub-provider, I cannot go on their defense. That's, I simply don't know.
Because when you resigned, you said you were resigning because you felt you'd lost the confidence of the voters. Was that an acknowledgement of co-responsibility for what happened, or was it just in order to have something to say?
You know, it's very difficult to explain, but I am absolutely refusing the idea that it was about corruption. I did not get a single penny out of this. I got just a few grey hairs and a few diseases, and has lost some illusions. That's all what I has brought up. I know Jana Hendrichova and David Mlíčko. I did not know them before. They were not my choice, but I have inherited them, and I did not have any reason to doubt about their skill, because she came from the finance ministry, was recommended by Zdeněk Hrubý, who was the long-time deputy finance minister under Sobotka, who was a climber, famous. He has died now because he lost the life in Himalaya, and he was a real climber. David Mlíčko was an co-author of the legislation on the public tenders. So he has written the law together with Mr. Sixtat. So I do not have any doubts about those people. They did not tell me about any problem. And
well, they probably
I do not have any doubt about their fairness. And they were doing their work as best as they could. Maybe they could make some mistake, you know, that's, I don't know. But I do not believe that they would be engaged in a corruption. They are now in a difficult situation. They even don't have the money to pay for their defense lawyers. But they are, you know, it's in this environment of the anti-corruption hysteria, where everything is put into one basket without any differentiation. So, and the only problem is that those poor guys, they don't have the money to pay the defense lawyer like Rittig and others have. You know, I have the concern, serious concern.
I mean, it is a problem
regarding myself. I don't know whether I have the enough will and appetite to serve this country, which I like very much. Simply, I am tired of that, and I will follow my private interest and will maybe not engaged in the politics anymore. I don't.
But you're 52,
and
you could have another 25 years of active political life ahead of
but
you.
You know, to work for the country, it's something different than to work for yourself. If you are working for the country, you have to sacrifice something. I was doing this since the middle of 80s until now. I was doing this, and it was always the first place in my life. Everything stand aside. Family, my entertainment, everything went aside. And the only, you could do this if you have some internal fire in your soul, and to believe that it has a sense.
You talk about corruption hysteria, though. I mean, does that mean that you think that there is far less corruption in this country than we're made to believe?
Oh, certainly. Look, I mean, it's usually the societies from one extreme to another. In the past, when there were the heydays of, economic boom, nobody take care. Or now, it's on the other side of the earth. So from one extreme to another. That's my conviction.
I'd like to. We've been talking for over an hour and a half.
It does not mean that I am here coming out of on the defense of the various crooks, thieves, and others. Not at all. Not at all. But here there is not any corruption. There could be some mistakes. There could be some. But look, if you are organizing something like a presidency, you cannot cancel that. You cannot postpone that. You cannot reorganize the public tender if you have a deadline when it must be done. Yeah. So,
but mistakes can be criminal.
Yes, but not you said corruption. So.
I mean, I'd like to take questions from the audience as well, because you've been patiently listening to us for the last hour and a half. I'm sure that there are some questions.
We spoke earlier for a little bit, you brought up Rand Paul in the American election, presidential election in 2016. So I was wondering who you think would be the best president for the Czech Republic. Who would you think would, because you said that Rand Paul would be terrible, you clearly thought Bill Clinton was a great president. Who do you think would be the most positive and the most?
I don't know, it's too soon. I don't see any personality which would show up as convincingly the front runner, measured by our interests. So, look, nothing against Ron Paul, he's an interesting guy, but what I have said, that for us it would be wrong. Maybe for the others not. But who is, I think Hillary Clinton would certainly be better for us than Obama. Yeah. On the Democratic side, and on the Republican side, Rubio would be fine. I guess Chris Christie too. I guess Jeb Bush too, but to have the name Bush, it's a disadvantage. So, but it does not mean that it's too soon, you know, to make some judgment.
Another question here.
I have a question. So over the past 10 years, Russia has been an increasingly important trade partner with the Czech Republic. How is the situation in Crimea going to affect the Czech Republic's trade relations?
The situation in Crimea in what sense?
So you guys get about 70% of your oil exports from Russia, correct? Will the situation in Crimea make you less willing to want to do business with Russia in the future?
Well, it's a good question. Right now, there are not any sanctions. Those sanctions which were declared, it's nothing. Yeah. So this is not going to harm anybody here. The question should take place in a situation when there are the real sanctions, and I think we should be able to survive a bit tough sanctions, but again I don't see any willingness among the EU members to do that. Italy does not want sanctions because of any, and their relationship with Gazprom, and it's a big deal for them. It's not big. We can import gas from Norway or whatever. We don't have any stake in a joint project with Gazprom like Italian any company has. I don't see so much enthusiasm for sanctions in London, for example. They do have all those Abramovichs and other monies, you know. Yesterday they were watching Chelsea, today they will be watching Manchester United. Manchester is owned by American, in fact. Manchester United is the American ownership.
You just recently wrote actually how well managed Bayern Munich is, and then just after that the Hoeneß affair came out that he'd actually not paid, I think, 27 million euros in taxes.
Yes, that's he was rightly. Although, you know, many Germans regret him because he has done a lot to raise the prestige of. Well, he had the gains, he had the personal profit from avoiding the taxation. So, and avoiding the taxation is.
So it's ironic because he just recently written an article. I think it was last year. In fact, he wrote an article which was about Bayern Munich and how well managed the team. Well, you did. It was on it was about a year ago. I'm not criticizing you. You went to know what was going on.
I have, but you should read this more carefully. I remember this article. Thank you for reading it. That you have read my soccer. It was about Europe. It was not about Uli. It was not about Uli Hoeneß. Not at all. It was about. German winning everything. Winning everything. Yeah.
We've got another question.
You say that Andrej Babiš is very dangerous in terms of Czech politics, but do you not think that, considering the disillusionment that people have now with this party system, that it's maybe time to give a more sort of unconventional style of politics a chance and maybe see what it can bring to the Czech Republic?
Yes, you know, I have to respect the result of the elections. That can show you something, but I'm not certain, you know, or rather I'm certain that the Czechs did not think very wise, because you know, to invite tiger into a meat shop in a hope that he will clean instead of eating the room. I doubt.
He hasn't just brought in puppets with him, though, has he? I mean, to give him credit, there's.
No, look, there are serious uncertainties how he has gained his wealth, how he has acquired Lovochemie, yeah, how he has acquired Agrofertica. And right now we are just reading about his competitors in the media, nothing about him. So it's full of attack from Prime Minister Sobotka to ODS or whatever, nothing about him. Nothing about him. He, it's interesting when he has purchased Mladá fronta Dnes, there was a famous investigative journalist, Jaroslav Kmenta. He has left to protest when he took the ownership of the mainstream media. In a sense that, you know, there's a lot of talks about the so-called Godfathers. About the Godfathers. And Kmenta said, Babiš is a godfather for himself. Yeah.
Have any more
I
questions?
think it's dangerous.
We have another question.
We haven't talked about the past and history very much tonight. I'm very interested to know about for example, in 1977 charter that you wrote, and the text. I read the text, a few sentences, and I'm interested to know your memories of 1989.
You did not ask.
I didn't ask.
No, look, 1977, I was a little boy. I was something like 15 years old, so did not play any role. Just starting to go to the grammar school, and because I had a privilege, you know, to go to those grammar school in one Prague district, which was filled with the various underground people or the children of the dissidents. So step by step I was somehow connected with the group of those nice people, and so in fact my memories, paradoxically, you know, for this time it's nice, because it was living in the happy ghetto of those young and older freedom fighters, and, you know, young people likes the adventure.
What did your parents
like
think?
to fight? Well, my mother and father-in-law, with whom I was growing up, they were very anti-communist, but they were not active. You know, my mother grew up from the family of the legionnaire. The other grandfather was in the anti-Nazi resistance. So yes, there were some foundations and examples to follow. So he has died in a concentration camp, not because being Jews, but because printing underground magazine. So yes, I got something at home, but my parents were not the dissidents. They just did not like the communists.
And we also had the question about
But
a few sentences.
what has formed me was, you know, the examples of the people like Václav Havel. So, for example, when I had the privilege to meet him for the first time, that was a very important moment in my life too. Joachim Topol, who is here, was this Ivan Lamper, founding fathers of one of the major samizdat magazine, originally called Jednou nohou, then Revolver Review. So they invited me in the course of time to work with them and make this initiation to introduce me to Havel.
Joachim told me that you were always political.
I don't know.
You were always a political animal.
So, few sentences. That was those era 1988, 89. So the change has come in a sense that the society started to awaken somehow. We could recognize this when we were organizing the demonstration in '88, that suddenly the young people were not afraid to come to the square, even if the reward was to be beaten by police.
Sorry, was that the memorial of the Empire?
Not just this, it started already earlier, summer 1988 was the first mass demonstration to mark the anniversary of the Russian occupation in 1968. Then it was gaining certain momentum. You mentioned the Palach anniversary was January '89, when Havel was arrested, I was arrested too, and then once they sentenced Havel, it was I think, very big mistake of the regime, because surprising way of the courage of certain people has showed up suddenly, those who were not willing to express themselves before suddenly were willing to do. So once Havel has been released from the prison in May '89, we were discussing, how to exploit this momentum of changing atmosphere in the society, and that's how a few sentences appeared. We wanted to offer something what would lead to a more massive demonstration of the will of the people. The number of the signatories of Charter 77 was just 2,000. So suddenly we had a feeling that there is an atmosphere in the society that not just 2,000, but maybe 20,000 people could express themselves freely. So we were offering a short, clean political statement, which had also some diplomatic connotation. Because
it was very cautious, wasn't it?
Of course, because the intention was to move to the other stage, not to have something just for 2,000, but then we were planning, to invite all the signatories for a public appearance. So, in a way, in a certain sense, it has helped to pave the road towards the November '89.
Maybe that's a cue for us to slowly stop.
We should stop, yeah.
But I apologise for not bringing up the subject of the pre-revolution past.
It was extraordinary, just to tell this. We are on the Václav Havel's library, so it was extraordinary time for me, because that was the real time, really, if he or myself were not arrested somehow, we were seeing each other practically every day or 3 times in a week, and working very closely together, so extraordinary time.
Did you have a feeling that there was a passing on through the generations as well? That a few sentences was really the first dissident, I suppose, document that was produced really by your generation?
No,
more than
it was written. No. Look, the concept has appeared in a mutual discussion of 3 people. Havel, Jirka Křižan has passed away already too. Unfortunately, he was a screenwriter for the movies. And myself, of course, we discussed with the others too. So, but he was written by Havel. as most of those texts. He was a literature man.
He was a control freak as well, wasn't he, I think?
Yeah. We have made few corrections with Jirka Křižan to sharpen that, in fact, to sharpen that. And the title, několik vět, it was, as I remember, the creator of Jirka Křižan, who argued that it must be short.
2000 slov. Anyway, Alexandr Vondra, thank you very much indeed for coming to talk to us. We've been talking for just under 2 hours, so it's quite a marathon, and I think that everybody's deserved the občerstvení. I think there's a, as you said, there's some wine and water and a couple of other things next door. So
it's 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock. Thank you very much.